The morning was cold, with a bite from the wind that sliced through even the thickest coat. As I strolled along the back trail behind my cottage, I stumbled upon a sound that caught my attention, a low, hissing noise emerging from a dilapidated barn near the sheep field. Curious, I approached cautiously and discovered a small, black and white cat, tightly curled around her three newborns, hidden among rotting boards and hay. Our eyes met, and there was an intensity in her gaze that spoke volumes. She wasn't merely frightened. She seemed to challenge me to come closer. In that moment, I realized this situation would be anything but straightforward. The next day, I returned with a plan and a basket filled with sardines, hoping to coax the cat, whom I would later name Marla, into a safer space. The barn creaked as I stepped inside, its old wood sighing in protest. I moved carefully, mindful not to disturb the rotted floor, as Marla remained where I had left her, still protective of her kittens with eyes fixed on me, sharp and wary. The instant I entered, she hissed, a clear warning that cut through the silence. The three kittens were barely a few days old, no larger than my hand. One of them had a crusted eye, another struggled to nurse, and the smallest, a gray one I would come to call Moss, lay still. I could tell he was weak. Leaving them behind didn't feel like an option. I placed the sardines a few feet away and settled onto an overturned feed bucket. I refrained from reaching out or speaking, opting instead to wait patiently. Edith had shared insights about feral mothers, cautioning that their fierce behavior stemmed from fear. If you make her feel cornered, she'll fight, but if you make her feel seen, she might let you be, she had said. So I stayed put, watching as time passed slowly. By dusk, Marla hadn't touched the food, but she also hadn't attacked. That was a small victory. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the barn, it felt like a quiet standoff between two beings uncertain of one another's intentions. Days passed in a rhythm of resilience. Each morning and evening, I returned to the barn with fresh supplies for Marla, maintaining my distance. Her reactions hadn't shifted much. She hissed if I edged too close, her fur fluffed out, yet she refrained from launching an attack. I chose to interpret this as a sign of progress. My focus slowly shifted to the kittens. When Marla wasn't looking, I would nourish them, especially Moss, who was lagging behind the others. Each day he appeared weaker, lingering away from the warmth of his siblings as if he sensed something dire. I couldn't shake the feeling that his survival was far from guaranteed. The barn was uncharacteristically quiet one morning. Usually filled with the soft sounds of Marla's growls and the gentle rustling of straw, this silence felt unsettling. The cold had seeped deep into the wooden beams overnight, and pale light streamed through gaps, casting eerie shadows. As I entered through the warped doorway, I sensed something was amiss. My heart sank. There was no sign of Marla, no flash of fur or protective hiss. Instead, I found the two kittens, Ash and Bramble, tangled in burlap by the feeding dish, their cries sharp and filled with confusion. They were hungry but otherwise safe. However, one kitten, Moss, was missing, and a rush of anxiety coursed through me. I crouched down, my hands scraping against the cold straw as I searched the barn. Where could he be? Panic set in. Had Marla rejected him? Had something else happened in the night? My thoughts swirled as I rummaged through every corner, every loose board of the barn. Just when my heart was heavy with dread, something caught my eye. Outside the crooked barn door, half hidden under a metal water trough, was a small gray bundle. Rushing outside, I slipped on the damp ground and fell to my knees beside him. There lay Moss, barely clinging to life. His fur was wet, his breath weak and shuddering, and his tiny body was ice cold. Without hesitation, I gathered him into my coat, hoping to revive his struggling spirit. Earlier the previous day in the barn, I had been sitting on the haystack when Theo arrived. He was young and always eager to act, which sometimes made him too impulsive. As he knelt beside Marla, he focused solely on her, missing the signs she was giving off. "We can't leave them here. We should take them to the shelter," he insisted, drawing closer. "No," I replied firmly, shaking my head. "She's their mother. If we take them from her now, we risk losing them all." I could see the frustration and confusion on Theo's face. He didn't grasp the importance of giving Marla the space she needed. It was vital that she felt this was her decision. Now, as I held Moss, I understood the stakes even more. The bond between a mother and her young is delicate and fragile, and sometimes it requires patience and trust. As I cradled him in my coat, I hoped we could still foster that bond and bring him back to health. Inside the cottage, I gently laid Moss in a shallow box lined with soft wool and placed a hot water bottle beneath layers of towels. Though his breathing was still shallow, it had a steady rhythm. With a sense of quiet urgency, I tried to recall Edith's instructions from when she'd taught me how to warm up hypothermic kittens. As I carefully dabbed the corners of his tiny mouth with a syringe filled with kitten milk, I suddenly heard the crunch of gravel outside. Theo had come back. Bursting through the door, he radiated an awkward energy, mud still caked on his boots and his hoodie askew. "You found them? Did she let you take them?" His eyes widened as they fell on Moss wrapped snugly in flannel on the table. "She didn't let me," I replied quietly, my gaze still on the kitten. "She was watching." Theo tilted his head. "Watching?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of what had just unfolded. "She moved him outside. I think she was trying to save him," I explained, almost to myself more than to him. She hadn't abandoned him. She was hoping something else could help. For a moment, Theo was silent, his expression shifting from confusion to something softer, perhaps respect or even guilt. "So, what do we do now?" I shook my head slowly, considering our next move. "We wait, and we include her in this. This isn't just a rescue, it's a negotiation." Before that, I had been holding the fragile little creature, feeling his heartbeat gently fade against my chest. Doubt crept in. Had I arrived just moments too late? Then I felt it, an electric tingle on the back of my neck, as if someone were watching me. Turning toward the tree line behind the barn, I spotted her. Marla. Low and still, she crouched at the edge where wild bramble met open field. There was no aggression in her demeanor, just a sharp gaze that considered everything around her. Her ears flicked once, and her tail curled tight around her paws. In that moment, she seemed to bear a heavy choice, whether to reclaim something fragile from the world or let it be helped. In truth, everything clicked into place. Marla hadn't abandoned Moss. She had carried him from the cold, dank barn into the warming embrace of the morning sun, seeking the only dry spot she could find in her desperate effort to save him. She wasn't failing. She was doing her best with what she had. Now, I found myself standing at a crossroads, caught between the instinct to help and the instinct to step back. Moss stirred a little in his box, finally gaining enough strength to lift his head. It was a small victory, though he still cried when the cold air pierced the warmth of the house. I looked over at him, wishing I could assure him everything would be all right. Earlier that day, I had noticed Marla again. This time, she stood right out in the open, watching a rusty, dented pickup truck idling by the edge of the lane. The man in the truck was tall and lean, his presence filling the space like smoke. A stranger whose identity soon became clear when Edith told me he was from the council. They had received complaints about me being in the barn that didn't just serve as shelter for Marla and her kittens, but was perhaps their last refuge from feeling unwanted. I felt a chill sweep through me as I absorbed Edith's words. The owners wanted to tear it down. Liability, rot, unwanted attention, the typical reasons. Edith stood outside my gate, her hands tucked into her thick wool cardigan, speaking softly with that man. I could hear the low murmur of their conversation drift through my front window. I had opened the door, only to be met with a reality I hadn't fully confronted until that moment. The barn could be gone soon, maybe within the week, and its disappearance would mean more than just losing a building. That night, after Theo had left and Edith had promised to see what she could do, I found myself alone in the kitchen. The kettle steamed gently on the stove, and the house was wrapped in silence. I thought about Ash and Bramble, still with Marla in the barn. I hesitated to move them, knowing this bonding moment between them and Marla might be their only connection to feeling safe. She finally seemed to trust me a little. Shaking that trust now felt unwise. But the thoughts wouldn't leave me. What if the barn really was gone tomorrow? If I wasn't there when it happened, would they survive? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, staring at the worn wood grain until my vision blurred, lost in the weight of unanswered questions. There was an urgency now, a realization that our rescue efforts had transitioned. We were no longer just trying to earn Marla's trust. Time was running short. The storm had already begun to stir unease in the land. As the wind dragged branches across rooftops and tore at the hedgerows, it felt as if secrets were being ripped from the earth itself. On that afternoon, I made my way to the barn, carrying the weight of Edith's words with me. She had spoken to the landowners, but they remained unmoved, having even nailed a bright orange notice to the barn's post. It read, "Unsafe structure. Demolition scheduled in 2 days." Inside, it was colder than usual, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. I called out softly, hoping to stir a response from Marla. Silence met me. No familiar growl or rustle, just a heavy stillness. My heart raced as I ventured deeper, navigating around old feed barrels and broken timber. The corner where Marla usually nestled was empty, her burlap nest shoved aside, the straw still warm but devoid of fur or kittens. Panic began to swell as I searched every nook and cranny, even crawling into the rafters and behind splintered stalls. Outside, the wind rattled the loose boards while rain started to patter against the metal roof. But there was no sign of Marla, Ash, or Bramble. It felt as if she had vanished into the landscape, leaving no goodbye or warning, just a profound silence. Standing in that dim space, disbelief washed over me, accompanied by an unsettling truth. I wasn't sure she would return. That night proved restless. Moss cried out in his sleep, his tiny body twitching as if he were reaching for something lost. As I fed him slowly, I whispered reassurances, words I hoped would soothe him, but perhaps were just as much for me. "You're safe now. I've got you. They'll be back." But when morning arrived, the barn still echoed with emptiness. Theo arrived just before noon, drenched from the rain. He clutched a mismatched pair of gloves and carried with him a persistent hope that both inspired and exhausted me. It made me consider the difficult choices we face. Sometimes rescue isn't merely about improvement. It's about deciding which losses we can bear. After all, I knew I didn't want to force them into a new existence they hadn't selected, nor did I want to strip Marla of her dignity or her defiant sense of control. Yet the thought of watching them disappear was equally painful. "They're here," I thought grimly as the low rumble of machinery echoed in the distance. The council's plans were a reality now, and by midday, the barn, a sanctuary for so many, would no longer exist. Time was slipping away, measured in mere hours. I carefully wrapped Moss in his blanket and held him close as I approached the elder tree. Marla, along with Ash and Bramble, had nestled together beneath its twisted roots, forming a small fortress of fur and connection. When I got there, Marla blinked slowly, acknowledging my presence without alarm. It felt as though she was expecting me. I settled on the ground a short distance away and began to speak softly, sharing information that she might not fully grasp. I told her about the barn's impending demolition and how I couldn't leave them in such chaos, where the noise would be overwhelming and the danger of machines loomed large. I offered a solution, a new, safe home, warm and quiet, free from threats. Yet even as I spoke, uncertainty gnawed at me. Who was I to dictate her future? To take her from the only haven she had known? The trees and shadows around her were part of her life, intrinsic to her very existence. Our search for the trio started earlier that day. Theo and I combed through hedgerows and fields, calling out gently as we crouched beside brambles and peered into drainage pipes. Every tiny movement stirred hope in us, though at times our efforts were met with disappointment, like when a rustle revealed only a pheasant or a flick of white turned out to be a plastic bag snared in thorns. It was Theo who finally pointed out a sign of success. "There," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath as we neared the crumbling stone wall that marked the edge of my field. Buried among the leaf mold and roots were Ash and Bramble, damp yet alive, looking up at us with bright eyes. Standing guard was Marla, her body low to the ground, fixed on us without a sound, neither hissing nor fleeing. Time seemed to stand still as we absorbed the moment, boots sinking in the mud, hearts racing. I crouched down, hand extended in a calm gesture, not asking for anything, merely offering my presence. In that quiet space between fear and trust, a shift occurred. Though not quite peace, there was a hint of hope. Then came the next morning, bringing with it the reality of imminent change. I would have to act before it was too late. Theo arrived at that moment with a carrier and soft towels, his expression a mix of hopefulness and uncertainty. Meanwhile, Edith stood by the gate, arms crossed tightly, watching the scene unfold. I had to gather the courage to make a decision, not just for their survival, but for the future I hoped to create for them. It was time to find a way forward, together. The sound of engines and clattering tools filled the air, a reminder of the urgency around us. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my knees, my focus still on Marla and her kittens. They were safe for now, nestled in the carrier between Theo and me, but the weight of the moment settled heavily on my shoulders. Holding the carrier felt like holding a delicate agreement. Marla, curling protectively over her tiny ones, watched the barn in the distance, her expression a mix of uncertainty and trust. I knew that the machines were moving closer. Their growls echoed as men unloaded tools, oblivious to the lives that had once thrived in this forgotten corner. I had anticipated this moment, imagining she would bolt at the first sign of danger. Instead, she remained still, testing my resolve. The moment felt surreal as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the soft cloth I had used to dry Moss the night I found him. Gently, I placed it near her paws, hoping it would encourage her to take a step towards safety. Marla's eyes flicked between the cloth and me, and then, ever so slowly, she nudged one of her kittens forward, followed by another. She paused, casting one last glance back at the barn, the only home she had known. My heart raced as she finally picked up Bramble by the scruff and padded toward the carrier, dropping him softly inside. Theo let out a sharp breath beside me, and I remained frozen in place, as if my movement might shatter this fragile moment of connection. Marla turned to me one last time, and without any command or sound, she joined her kittens in the carrier. In that instant, she had made her choice, not just for rescue, but for trust. It was profound. I could feel the weight of that decision wrap around us, reassuring yet bittersweet. The sounds of the demolition crew grew louder, but they blurred into the background as I focused on this small family, resting safe for the moment. What was about to be lost felt unimaginably heavy, but here, in this shared experience, something new had begun. The shelter was eerily quiet when we stepped inside. There was an unsettling stillness, interrupted only by the faint hum of the heat lamps in the recovery room. As I carried the carrier through the back entrance, the afternoon light streamed in, casting long, pale stripes on the tiled floor. The mingled scents of disinfectant and dry kibble hung in the air, reminding me of the somber purpose of our visit. Theo walked closely behind me, his hands tucked deep into his pockets, his shoulders tense with uncertainty. Marla had stayed silent throughout the journey. Curled protectively over her kittens, she remained alert, eyes half-lidded but watchful. When I placed the carrier on the counter, her head lifted, not with panic or anger, but with a careful gaze that seemed to assess her new surroundings. The staff moved with quiet efficiency around us, casting glances filled with professional concern, but refraining from asking questions I feared I couldn't answer. Edith arrived a few minutes later, bringing with her an old, soft fleece blanket from home. Her expression hinted at experience with countless similar situations, each one as heavy as the last. She didn't need to say a word. The look in her eyes spoke volumes. As I opened the carrier slowly, I braced myself for her to bolt, to lose her calm and revert to the wildness she might have felt in the barn. But instead, she simply raised her nose toward the warmth of the overhead lamp. The kittens stirred beneath her, their tiny limbs stretching instinctively toward the new heat. I felt a wave of emotion as I noticed the change in Marla's eyes. They no longer held the hardness of fear. Instead, they seemed weary and wary, carrying the weight of resignation. It struck me then how much this moment represented, taking her from a world of instinct and freedom to one of safety, but with its own set of challenges and routine. In choosing to safeguard her, I felt the ache of asking her to adapt, to accept a life that may feel more like a cage than the freedom she once knew. Theo stood beside me, waiting for a signal to move forward. I could sense his hesitance, mirroring my own feelings. "We have to decide now," Edith urged softly. But I hesitated, still lingering beside that elder tree, that barn, and all the choices that had led us here. As I looked back at Marla through the carrier's mesh, I couldn't shake the feeling that, in this moment, she was both forgiving and enduring. And just as we prepared to leave, with the weight of the barn behind us, I couldn't help but wonder if this transition would be a new beginning or a lost chapter for all of us. Rescue doesn't always lead to the endings we expect. Often it's not about grand gestures or joyful reunions. Sometimes it's simply about offering a haven to a creature that needs it, allowing them to decide when and if they can trust. Take Marla, for instance. She remains at the shelter's back room, a place that provides her with a sense of safety, away from the chaos of barking dogs. Her keen gaze reflects a cautious spirit. She hasn't fully relaxed yet. But there's something powerful in her presence. By simply choosing to stay, she offers a subtle acceptance of those around her. It's important to note that acceptance doesn't always equate to affection. I still visit Marla. I often find myself sitting quietly by her door, sharing the same sardines that first drew her attention. While she may not always approach, she doesn't retreat either. This small act of coexisting may be enough. It reminds me that true rescue isn't solely about changing lives dramatically. Sometimes it's about allowing a wild soul to feel safe enough to remain present, even from a distance. As for Moss, he has grown stronger since that poignant day. He now sleeps curled up on a fleece blanket in my cottage, breathing steadily. Occasionally he cries in his dreams, and I find myself wondering what images haunt him: the cold earth, distant memories of hardship, or the gentle rhythm of his mother's heart. Meanwhile, Ash and Bramble continue their journey at the shelter, where they too have a sanctuary away from the noise. The staff respects their need for space, understanding that trust comes gradually. Reflecting on these experiences makes me realize the profound impact of patience and being present. If you found yourself in a moment hovering between fear and trust, whether as a caregiver or as the one needing care, consider sharing this story. Let others witness the strength in providing support without expectations. For sometimes, it's this choice to simply be there that leaves the most lasting impression, both on those we help and on ourselves. Your understanding of this quiet strength is a remarkable gift. If this message resonated with you, feel free to subscribe, leave a comment, or share it with someone who recognizes the beauty in earning trust. One breath, one heartbeat at a time.